Come on, Bryce. There are a lot more important problems than Sri Lanka to worry about. Like what? Well, we have to end apartheid for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race, stop terrorism and world hunger. We have to provide food and shelter for the homeless, and oppose racial discrimination, and promote civil rights, while also promoting equal rights for women. We have to encourage a return to traditional moral values. Most importantly, we have to promote general social concern and less materialism in young people. Those are some lines that the character of Patrick Bateman had in the 2000 film American Psycho, based off of the book by the same name from 1991. In this iconic film, I think Christian Bale really captures or defines to a lot of people, pop culture in general, the world, what this Wall Street kind of dude bro type of culture thing was. Yes, it does take it further with American Psycho-ness and things like this. If you haven't seen the film, you've probably seen some memes by now. I mean, this is 2000 when it was, and the book was from 1991 before that. I hadn't actually read or heard the book, but when I recently decided to watch the film again, I went back and actually got the audiobook. And the book goes even deeper into the psychosis and the things that go on in it. But the film itself does its own great job of converting that. The film was done by Mary Harmon, and the book was by Brent Easton Ellis. And there was some trepidation with Brent Easton Ellis of if this film could actually be even made from the book, the content, which is this, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, American psychosis of sorts. It would be tough, but she did an amazing job of converting what's in the book to the medium of film, and it didn't catch on as much back when it was released, but has since then achieved cult status. And I'm trying to think, if this movie was released today, could you even make this movie today? I doubt you could make the movie as it was. And the book, I think there's still books like this being released. You have to go out and find them. But even the book itself, I don't know who Brent Easton Ellis is. He might have thought twice about doing something like this. But with current timeline, I think a good comparison would be something like The Boys. The comic itself was very adult mentality required, so is the show. But some people just say, haha, this is making fun of the people on the right. It's focusing on the MAGA type of stuff and destroying these Trump followers. Homelander is supposed to be Trump, and you're supporting him. They're showing how garbage this is and things like this. And then other people are like, no, it's only the libs telling us messages. You see the Pepsi kind of ad thing. But it's just something that has a social commentary. And there's a lot of things, a lot of creations out there being like, we're talking about our lived experience. We want this to reflect the world the way it is. And I've seen very excellent ways to do this without having to sacrifice the actual storytelling aspect of this. And when I first watched American Psycho, I don't think I had the memory of this particular scene, this whole thing about Sri Lanka and things like that. And I will actually read out the extended part in the book just to show how much more detail goes in there. And just the craft of taking something that's in a book and simplifying it for the screen. There's other scenes I, of course, remember more, like the speed drawing that's going on the screen. If you are watching the video version of this, wherever you're listening to this, there will be a link also where you can find the visual version. It's part of the Doe series. You can also get some merchandise with the Doe. I'm going to plug my own stuff. You can find it at the store there on Redbubble for now. But regardless of your political leanings, what do you think of what Bateman said there? But just wait, let's listen to the longer version of it. The death of downtown, he says, then pointing at each word in the headline. Who gives a rat's ass? I automatically expect Stash to look up from his plate, but he still stares at that one lone piece of sushi, smiling to himself and nodding. Hey, Vane then says, as if she was insulted, that affects us. Oh ho ho, Tim says warningly. That affects us? What about the massacres in Sri Lanka, honey? Does that affect us too? What about Sri Lanka? Well, that's a cool club in the village, Vanden shrugs. Yeah, that affects us too. Suddenly Stash speaks up without looking. That's called the Tonka. He sounds pissed, but his voice is even and low, his eyes still on the sushi. It's called the Tonka, not Sri Lanka. Got it? The Tonka. Vanden looks down and meekly says, Oh. I mean, don't you know anything about Sri Lanka? About how the Sikhs are killing like tons of Israelis there? Timothy goads her. Doesn't that affect us? Kapamaki roll, anyone? Evelyn cuts in cheerfully, holding up a plate. Oh, come on, Price, I say. There are more important problems than Sri Lanka to worry about. Sure, our foreign policy is important, but there are more pressing problems at hand. Like what? He asks without looking away from Vaden. By the way, why is there an ice cube in my soy sauce? No, I start hesitantly. Well, we have to end apartheid for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race, stop terrorism and world hunger, ensure a strong national defense, prevent the spread of communism in Central America, work for a Middle East peace settlement, prevent U.S. military involvement overseas. We have to ensure that America is a respected world power. Now, that's not to belittle our domestic problems, which are equally important, if not more. Better and more affordable long-term care for the elderly, control and find a cure for the AIDS epidemic, clean up environmental damage from toxic waste and pollution, improve the quality of primary and secondary education, strengthen laws to crack down on crime and illegal drugs. We also have to ensure that college education is affordable for the middle class and protect Social Security for senior citizens, plus conserve natural resources and wilderness areas and reduce the influence of political action committees. The table stares at me uncomfortably, even Stash, but I'm on a roll. But economically, we're still in a mess. We have to find a way to hold down the inflation rate and reduce the deficit. We also need to provide training and jobs for the unemployed, as well as protect existing American jobs from unfair foreign imports. We have to make America the leader in new technology. At the same time, we need to promote economic growth and business expansion and hold the line against federal income taxes and hold down interest rates while promoting opportunities for small businesses and controlling mergers and big corporate takeovers. Price nearly spits up his absolute after this comment, but I try to make eye contact with each one of them, especially Vaden, who, if she got rid of the green streak, and the leather, and got some color, maybe joined an aerobics class, slipped on a blouse, something by Laura Ashley, might be pretty. But why does she sleep with Stash? He's lumpy and pale and has a bad cropped haircut and is at least 10 pounds overweight. There's no muscle tone beneath that black t-shirt. But we can't ignore our social needs either. We have to stop people from abusing the welfare system. We have to provide food and shelter for the homeless, and oppose racial discrimination, and promote civil rights, while also promoting equal rights for women, but change the abortion laws to protect the right to life, yet still somehow maintain women's freedom of choice. We also have to control the influx of illegal immigrants. We have to encourage a return to traditional moral values, and curb graphic sex and violence on TV, in movies, in popular music, everywhere. Most importantly, we have to promote general social concern and less materialism in young people. I finish my drink, the table facing me in total silence. Courtney smiling and seems pleased. Timothy just shakes his head in bemused disbelief. Evelyn is completely mystified by the turn the conversation has taken, and she stands, unsteadily, and asks if anyone would like dessert. So there you have it. What do you think of what he said? How many of the things he said do you think still apply today? This was, again, the book was written in 1991, and it's talking about political action committees, which are PACs. That's still a regular thing being talked about now. Sri Lanka was just recently in the news, just collapsing due to mismanagement. I don't know if it's actually mismanagement or just the application of certain first world policies that are able to be done in the first world due to the excess of resources and wealth that they've accumulated that don't necessarily apply and fit for developing nations. Education, drugs, healthcare, those are typical things that were talked about back then. And also back then it was the AIDS epidemic, and right now, of course, we have the Rona, the Wu flu, and things like that. But also the same guy involved. You can look back, and Dr. Fauci was actively involved in the AIDS epidemic back then, and he's also been actively involved in the current pandemic right now. As for communism in Central America, we just recently had some Venezuelan immigrants being sent to Martha's Vineyard, which is definitely a place I could see Patrick Bateman sort of people going on to vacation at, and they're just escaping a country that collapsed due to socialist and communist collectivist policies and things like that. As for the inflation rate and the deficit, I think the deficit back then was probably a quarter what it is now, and inflation in 1991 was definitely not at the 8.5% that you have it in the United States of America currently and the rest of the world, dealing with some effects of just the government since 1991 and before, and also exacerbated by the current pandemic that Joe Biden convinces us or assures us is actually over, yet him and other people still have their executive powers and orders to have emergency actions and things like so whatever with that stuff. I highly suggest you actually do go watch the movie, or even better, read the book for yourself before you even listen to any more of this stuff. You can come back and listen to this, or if you haven't seen it in a while, get the refresher course. But I think it's really a nice touch here that you have Price nearly splitting up his absolute after this particular comment where he was talking about hold the line against federal income taxes and hold down interest rates while promoting opportunities for small businesses and controlling mergers and big corporate takeovers. Because I think even back then people completely understood like that's not something those kind of people with this influence and money are actually about. Like small businesses isn't really something that I think either parties in the United States of America, the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, really care much about at this current time. And actually, it's kind of a global type of thing. It's a lot easier for a government to have dealings with and garnish resources and other things from. Think about it. If you had 10 companies making $100 million, then you can do the regulations to them. They'll give you money for your campaigns and things like this, the rules and things like that. You only hire maybe 10 agents to go to those places and make sure you're getting your percentage of resources from those companies. But then if you have 100 companies making that same amount, then all of a sudden you have to hire more people. There's more people coming in and out, and more people have different interests and asking you for different things that might be not necessarily working with these other companies. If you have 1,000 companies making that 100 million, if you have 10,000 companies making that 100 million, it just adds more work for the government. So it makes complete sense that you have a centralized organization like the state government, also encouraging centralized private sector, mostly private sector entities to deal with. That just completely makes sense. But then he goes off here, and you can tell that with Patrick Bateman, as some of you might know, spoiler if you haven't actually seen the stuff, he's the American Psycho. You can tell that this is just an act. This is just something people say, and this is also true about people that I've met in regular life. You personally might have said some of these things. And one of the things I wonder when I'm talking to some people about the things that they might say, I ask them, what do you mean by that particular thing? How do you define this actual thing over here? What should be done about that thing you're claiming is an actual issue? If that is that big of an issue, in my estimation, you'd have actually looked into it. And there was a time when I would just say things and then I'd actually look into it and I found, hey, maybe this isn't as bad as I thought. And hey, how come I'm not talking about this other underlying issue? And to my consternation, I found that in many cases, people just say the words to say them. They're just saying it to say it. They don't expect anyone to actually counter or ask them why they think the thing that they say that they think. It's a strange place to be. One of the things that I personally looked into, being a Negro who was living in the United States of America at the time, I looked more into the racial issues, and I didn't necessarily find them to be as horrific as some were telling me that it was. Do you think things were worse in 1991 when this was written, or do you think things are worse now in the United States of America? And he speaks about providing food and shelter for homeless people, and even though this is the start of the book, and I'm not sure if it's also in the start of the film, but it's definitely in the start of the book, you've already had an inkling of how he thinks about homeless people and other things when he talks about civil rights movements and things like this. Is this political left or political right? He also mentions promoting equal rights for women and also changing the laws to be more of a right to life stance. Right here is something people in the political left might say, oh, there's no possible way you can be for women and also be against changing these laws. And also, of course, we had the Roe versus Wade overturning recently. And then he finishes off his role talking about sex and TV, movies, music, everywhere. And most importantly, we have to promote general social concern and less materialism in young people. He also talks about traditional moral values, graphic sex. But even if you've just seen the memes, you know, one of the memes is from a scene where there is some relative gratuitous things that he is into. So this is a typical thing, though. This is rather common. In my experience, people literally mean figuratively, especially Americans when they're speaking about political issues. And I think this is just an amazing story, amazing piece. I don't know how good the remake was. Was it a shot-for-shot remake? Like, they did the Let Me In film, this vampire film, I think from Sweden, and then they redid it in America with Chloe Moretz, and it was pretty much a shot-by-shot remake. Then they also had something like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo that was with Numi Rapace. First, I think that was also somewhere in Scandinavia, and then it was redone with Rooney Mara. That kept pretty close to the original. I still prefer the original in both these cases, although Let Me In was just shot for shot, exactly just changing the location into America instead of somewhere in, I think it was Sweden again. But Girl with the Dragon Tattoo took a bit of more liberties, but still kept that same kind of feeling. So I don't know what they did with the American Psycho film. I might give it a watch. I'm not quite sure. I don't think it would spoil my experience with the actual original book and film, but let me know. Just let me know in the comment section somewhere if you've actually seen it and suggest that I watch it. But one of the things about this is there's a lot of messages in this. The content is pure adult content. If you want to talk about certain things, did these things happen or did they not happen? And already from the start, does he say these things? Does he actually believe it? Is he just thinking, acting in a certain way? How is he perceived by the people around him? And there's a descent into madness kind of in this entire film, in the book. Definitely, just high suggest you definitely go see this or rewatch it again. But one of the things I was thinking with this, can you tell Brent Easton Ellis's political leanings by the quotes, by the book? Do you know him at all? Do you know anything about him? Has he said anything else about his own personal political leanings? Would that change your experience about the actual content at all? In my estimation, no. And I think that's what somebody who tells a great story is. That's part of the humanity. Does he personally have to be an American psycho to tell this story about somebody who is a psycho? He's even American. Maybe he's not. Brent Easton Ellis could be Canadian. But in that sense, he can still communicate and take us to this world to have us understand something. And I think there is something that's lost when people are just trying to depict actual day-to-day life in these imaginary stories, change things around to say something about their lived experience. And in many cases, if what they depict on the actual screen, on the actual books, in the actual pages, in the actual audio is their lived experience, then their lived experience, their lives must be relatively boring because some of the results are just pretty much just garbage, just uninteresting. And that's kind of the worst thing to do with entertainment, is just to not be entertaining, just be boring. I'll leave links somewhere here where you can get some more of the quotes that I pulled out for this. I'm not going to read all the quotes I pulled out. You can also go to Goodreads and find other quotes that I did pull out. There's actually even a location online that has the book where you can actually read it. I don't know if it's legal to read it online, but it's an older book and you can find this book relatively easy. Highly, highly suggest. But this whole thing with Patrick Bateman, do you have to live a certain thing in order to be able to communicate that certain thing? I don't think you do. It's just an idea. Humans can share ideas. You don't have to accept or agree with somebody in order to find some kind of understanding, some kind of connection to them. And I think that's one of the key things that was in this, was Patrick Bateman was just not able to actually connect to people. And here's another quote that I'm going to go with. There's an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory, and though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours. And maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable. I simply am not there. It is hard for me to make sense on any given level. Myself is fabricated, an aberration. I am a non-contingent human being. My personality is sketchy and unformed. My heartlessness goes deep and is persistent. My conscience, my pity, my hopes disappeared a long time ago, probably at Harvard, if they ever did exist. There are no more barriers to cross. All I have in common with the uncontrollable and the insane, the vicious and the evil, all the mayhem I have caused and my utter indifference towards it, I have now surpassed. I still, though, hold on to one bleak truth. No one is safe. Nothing is redeemed. Yet I am blameless. Each model of human behavior must be assumed to have some validity. Is evil something you are, or is it something you do? My pain is constant and sharp, and I do not hope for a better world for anyone. In fact, I want my pain to be inflicted on others. I want no one to escape. But even after admitting this, and I have countless times, in just every act I've committed, and coming face to face with these truths, there is no catharsis. I gain no deeper knowledge about myself. No new understanding can be extracted from my telling. There has been no reason for me to tell you any of this. This confession has meant nothing. Just most definitely go check out the book. If you haven't read the book, if you haven't listened to the audiobook, you've only watched the movie, most definitely go back and actually get that. It's some good stuff. It's I don't know. But the stuff that was said right there, I think people on different political leanings, wherever you are, you can probably think of somebody on the other side that's not on your side or not your team that thinks this way. Maybe you personally think this way about certain things. And I think there is this, I don't want to say ennui. Is that the perfect term for this or the appropriate term? Let me check. Okay, listlessness and dissatisfaction resulting from lack of interest or boredom. There is something in this that I think it goes with the whole American dream type of thing, where people have been told you can do so much, you can do all these amazing things, or America is a place where people can do whatever they want. And then you kind of are born in America, or you find yourself in America, and you start realizing that you can't do all these things. That actually takes exceptional people in exceptional circumstances to do certain particular things, but your standards are so high. So you get the feeling that, hey, I'm actually left behind. I'm actually rather limited. And there's nothing wrong with being average, but if you've been told you're not supposed to be average, you're supposed to be this American, you're supposed to be this American dream type of person, then things kind of can make you kind of psychotic and you can kind of lash out. I can see some of that happening in the general American sphere that I don't necessarily see happening in developing countries as much. And also certain parts in the first world that just give people a more realistic idea of what the capabilities are. We're not all made equal regardless of what's said in the Bible or the Constitution. And to close this off, guys, gals, and everybody else in between, thank you all very much for listening and watching. If you're watching the video version, there'll be links somewhere where you can get merchandise with this design and many other designs on it. And I'm going to leave you off with one last quote, which I'm not really complaining about this. We are visual beings. Patrick Bateman is a character that's handsome. If you're handsome, if you look good, you're going to be treated in certain ways. You get to get away with certain things, get certain perks. Visual beings, this makes sense. And you look at the illiterati class, you look at some of the celebrities, some of the people who are supposedly better off, who seem to claim to be happier and doing well off. This is a key thing that I think they hang on to because I think there is this hollowness in their actual life. But in my experience, there's some very unhappy people that seem to be saying we should live like they live or listen to how they say we should live. And like, nah, you don't look happy. So and this is the quote. All it comes down to is this. I feel like shit, but look great.